We're so excited to have so many people join us today from across the country. You guys nearly maxed out our system, so hopefully we won't have any issues there. This recording will be available from our website, as all of our webinars are. So if you or anyone else want to see it later, or we do have any issues, then certainly go there. I'm really excited about the response we got to this. And we know that you guys have so much going on right now, so many things to navigate and figure out. You're trying to figure out what your everyday looks like and what your future looks like. And I love that one of my favorite people in the world, Daniel Turner, took the initiative to put this team together and to help you guys start to think about how you use your facilities in a way that promotes health and safety and also quality learning for the families and children that you've dedicated your life to. So before I turn it over to them, a couple of logistics. First of all, if you guys are familiar with Zoom, you can hover over your bar at the top of the screen for chat. And for questions, please add your questions as we go. We are going to save time. Hello, everybody. We've got a lot of people coming on here. We will save time at the end for your questions, and I will monitor the chat and questions during your presentation. Daniel will direct you to his website, so you will know where to find this presentation if you'd like to access it. And so I would just like to say welcome, Daniel, and new friends Kevin, Pete, and Jose. So thank you very much for being here. Daniel is not a novice with having me rope him into things. He was brave enough to come with us to San Diego almost 4 years ago and be one of the first speakers that we have at our Shift conference and talk about design for early education centers. And I think most of these photos are your designs, right, Daniel?
That's correct. Most of it are mine or the team's. Absolutely, Kathy. And thank you so much for having us. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to let you introduce this great group of people that you've pulled together, and I'll see you guys back here shortly for Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. Yeah, if you don't, just flip forward to that next slide. We've got some, I'd like to introduce the team to everyone. Welcome everyone across the country. Yeah, Kathy, I've been a fan of HINGE and the Shift conferences for many years, and happy to be part of that team. My story, our firm has been focused on early education, architecture, preschool design since about 2005, so about I guess going on 15 years now. Designed a number of schools across the country. And then we recently have been involved with some of the folks you're seeing on the screen today on schools, Pete Simpson at TerraLab Landscape Architects, and Kevin Bruns with EB Consulting Engineers, as well as Jose Guevara, who's here in my office. So if you guys will each take a second to introduce yourself to the group, and then we'll dive right in.
Sure, I'll start. My name is Pete Simpson, as Daniel mentioned. My company, TerraLab Landscape Architects, is based in Houston, along with Daniel and then Kevin as well. We mainly focus on kind of a few sectors, but the main one would be parks and recreation. And then we also have some work, obviously, with early childhood centers and daycares, if you will. We've done some work with Daniel and other clients, both locally here in Houston and then nationally as well. And just a little about me, I am a father of a 3-year-old, so feeling for all you folks out there who have your kids at home. And if you hear any loud noises, it's probably my son.
Good afternoon, Kevin Bruns with EB Consulting Engineers. I'm a licensed professional engineer. I've been doing MEP design, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing design for 28 years now. Our company is based in Houston. The majority of our work is in and around Houston or the Gulf Coast region. And we do a little bit in all different sectors, whether it's retail, commercial, institutional, hospitality. So we see a lot of different types of projects, and have worked with Daniel for a number of years now. A lot of the daycare projects that work with him are fun and inspirational, that we're able to do some fun things in there and be creative in some of our lighting designs and some of our HVAC designs. And I am a father of two. I have an 18-year-old daughter and a 23-year-old son. So I'm very close to being with my wife as empty nesters here, able to do more stuff and on our own, as we're not dealing with our children because they're moving on to be independent.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jose Guevara here. I'm with Daniel Scott Turner Design. I'm an architect here at the firm. I've only been here shortly, but been doing a lot of really exciting things. And I'm looking forward to talking about some of the best practices for reopening your childcare centers.
Thank you, Jose, and thank you also. Jose is the lead author on this slide deck that we're presenting to you today. So let's get right into it. So we've heard this phrase quite a bit, a new normal. This is definitely a new and unusual time for all of us, a challenging time. I don't have any children. I have two four-legged children, but I can only relate that it's been challenging for you as childcare operators and owners and parents as well. So back in mid-July, back in mid-May, Texas was sort of coming. We were working on coming out of our lockdown or our quarantine. And so I ventured out and visited a couple of schools, or a few schools, a few providers who've been clients of ours here in the state of Texas. And the thing that really, some of them were open, some of them were trying to figure out how to reopen, or in those various stages. The thing that really jumped out at me is how there was just a complete lack of information on sort of, what are the best things that we should be doing, what's safe, what's not safe. So following those meetings and walking through the schools and seeing, sadly, schools with a much smaller population than they originally had before the virus. On the way home, I was sort of brainstorming, how can we get some good information into the hands of the operators and school owners that can give them a sense of confidence that they're doing the right thing. So I jumped on the phone with Pete and Kevin, actually in the car, thinking we turned into an hour and a half long chat. Jose was involved in that as well, and we sort of decided to put this information together for you, based on the fact that a lot of the information since mid-May till now has been evolving. We've learned a lot about fomite transmission, which is, surface transmission of the disease, and we're now learning that that's less of a challenge as the sort of droplet transmission, which is why we're all wearing masks these days. The droplets are even less of a challenge, and Kevin is going to talk about this. Than the aerosol transmission, which is news that we've kind of gathered here in the last couple of weeks, that the virus can actually, spread through even smaller aerosols as opposed to droplets. So the guidelines that we're going over today are based on the CDC draft guidelines that were originally published back in May, the local and state guidance from states, or the local emergency guidance from states including Texas, California, New York, Georgia, Michigan, and Oregon. So we dug through all of those, and we've kind of aggregated the best of that information here. Our guidelines, I just need to say, are probably more stringent than what your local and state guidances are on many levels. But as you know, you really have to defer to that local and state jurisdiction. So let's look forward to classroom downsizing. So this graph illustrates in aqua, or the blue color, these are the ratios per age that were the emergency guidance for the state of Texas. The bars in magenta are the standard guidelines for licensing. So you can see, just starting with the youngest age, moving on up, we're talking about smaller group sizes here. So, so that's obviously, you want to sort of control your group size, and that allows you to sort of control the spread of the virus. We've got some national and now international data back on this. The international data, the best is coming out of Denmark and Norway as well. So Denmark reopened in April with this concept of social pods. So the social pods would be groups of 6 or less, meaning that children would stay with their same sort of 5 or fewer friends throughout the day. We know as childcare providers that there has to be a balance between the quality and engagement of their day and the safety. So this social pod, which we're going to lean heavily on in this presentation, it might not be right for you. It might not, as Kathy would say, it might not even be economically feasible for you. But what the national and international data is saying is that this is the best practice in both of these countries, Denmark and Norway, which are much smaller than the United States. They've not seen a spike in cases since reopening using this model. Germany uses the same model. Their max group size goes up to 15. But as this graph shows, that was our knee-jerk response, was to get smaller groups into the classrooms and get the schools reopened. So some critical issues. Let me hand this off to Jose. Sort of gathered these 3 main topics of critical issues that we focused on, and some of these have migrated again since mid-May, but let's talk about these briefly.
All right, thank you. So some of these are seemingly obvious, but whenever we were putting all this information together 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, it was really a novel concept to start to safety and distance, and to practice better hygiene, and then talking about more technical aspects of your facilities, like the air circulation and ventilation. So we took all of the CDC's information that they provided and kind of broke it down to these 3 main areas where we think most of the facilities should be focusing on. To begin with, for safety and distancing, definitely reducing the classroom ratio sizes to have the smaller social pods, just like we were talking about in the previous slide. And separating those groups of children and keeping them all together in the same groups at all times, basically. Also, it's going to be really critical to stagger all the activities whenever possible, so that we don't have these social pods kind of intermingling or crossing paths of circulation, because that could lead to potential risk of infection. So definitely staggering play times, and then staggering the pickup and drop off interactions that we can talk about in another slide coming up. Further, for hygiene, definitely providing additional hand washing stations. Oh, can you go back to the critical issues? Thank you. In hygiene, hand washing stations are going to be really important. This is paramount for maintaining proper hygiene. We think it gives a good opportunity to have practicing proper technique. If hand washing isn't available, then we can definitely have sanitizing stations throughout the facility with 60% alcohol solution. It's kind of a standard that the CDC provides. Definitely no sharing food or toys. And we know that's kind of difficult for some of these age groups, but it's going to be another one of those critical issues that prevents any kind of like cross contagion. And then finally, for hygiene, outdoor sanitation stations. I think we'll talk about that in another slide that P will talk about. But that's also critical to making sure that constantly practicing good hygiene. And then finally, for air circulation, I think one of the key issues is to provide fresh air whenever possible. And another main thing would be to filter all the existing air. And this is something that Kevin will talk about a little later in a more technical way, but it's essentially bringing in as much fresh air as possible and then filtering out all the dirty air as much as possible. And go to pick up and drop off now.
Thanks, Jose. Please post some questions and comments and feedback, but we're operating under the understanding that some of the clients that we're working with is that parents are still not coming into your building. So let me know if that's correct. You've done such a great job making your buildings and your classrooms and your hallways, you know, a representation of your school and your program, and you're proud to show them off. And now, unfortunately, parents don't get to see any of that. So all of that good energy that you had, you know, at the front reception, at sign in, sign out, that really fertile exchange that used to occur every day in the classroom with a parent and a teacher, you know, as they exchange and talk about the previous day, or that exchange that also happened in the afternoon at pickup. All of that stuff now has been shifted from inside your building to outside your building. And I would imagine that most of your buildings weren't designed to accommodate that. And so one thing we're talking about with this slide is that pickup and drop off option, and how do we make that experience, for lack of a better phrase, less painful than it currently is. So some of the things we're looking at, this slide has a picture of the Endeavor model in Dunwoody, Georgia. What we did here was we installed a tensile structure, a fabric structure, is over their front door that gives a little bit of relief to that famous Georgia heat, and then also can sort of shed rain. So that health exchange, that sort of health screening now has a place to occur that's in a sheltered area. Some other things to consider here are, you know, we want to exhibit good social distancing. So maybe you engage your older children in some of the signage and some of the messaging, like the dots. Have the children help out with that. Have them, you know, design that for you. Have them make up the signs that give your messaging. This is a really important point as well for your staff, for the people, whether it's you, whether it's your principal or your assistant principal, whoever that staff person is that's managing this sort of exchange. A, we have to be safe. They need PPE. B, this is really strenuous, so this might need to be a couple of people. They might have to work in shorter shifts, but really focus on what are the needs of the person that is handling this exchange now that's outside of the building as opposed to inside of the building. What do we do to message how we're keeping safe inside of the building? What sort of technology is there? Is there, you know, a temperature reader that's optical as opposed to a thermometer that might be a little less intimidating for children until they're used to this process? And then what is our messaging to parents? It's now that we don't get to have that in the classroom exchange. Do you rely heavier on your platforms like tadpoles or things like that to communicate sort of daily charting and things like that? Now that all of that wonderful, rich indoor experience has been shifted outside, the message would be, think about that outside space. How can it be most representative of my school and my program? What are the steps that make that an extension of my school as opposed to just a quick little exchange? So yeah, moving from drop-off into the classroom strategies. That next slide. What we were focusing on again is the creation of these social pods. So the social pods, again, largely, we're talking about infant classrooms. How do you turn an infant classroom? Maybe one of the schools that I walked through had 3 infants, 1 caregiver, yet they still had 9 cribs in there. So we quickly sort of said, you know, is there an extra classroom we have somewhere? Let's get 4 of these cribs out of this room and go store them somewhere else, so we can create that physical distancing space for infants. And then we also have less objects that we have to clean throughout the day. So you're not unnecessarily cleaning things that just aren't even being used. So next slide is the infant classroom. So you see the before above here and the after. Yeah, let's click forward. Thanks, Kathy. Okay, so this would be like a modified infant classroom layout. Because you don't really want to have a big capital spend here, what we're sort of proposing is reusing our existing furniture just in a different way. So you see we have the same number of cribs in this layout as we had in the original layout. We've now arranged them that they're no longer head-to-head, so we're going the head-to-toe. You can see that we're essentially setting up 2 classrooms. So there's now 2 gross motor areas. There's 2 feeding areas. This classroom has an illustration where there's a portable hand wash sink on the lower classroom, and then you would also need to add a diapering station. This would probably be two caregivers with 1 floater or support staff or administrator that comes in to facilitate like food from one classroom to the other. Another strategy we're showing here is the installation of a sanitizing drawer, which can be done with sort of minimal sort of plumbing requirements. You would just need new connections, or a dishwasher. So you know, teachers are no longer having to leave the classroom to sanitize mouths, toys, and other things. So you could just put them in this drawer, shut that drawer, let it run a cycle. As we click forward to the next slide to the toddlers, you know, toddlers now we've gone beyond 0 to 17 months, and now we're talking about toileting. So where you had 1 classroom above with basically 1 toileting room for the entire classroom, we have to look at how to relay out that in a modified configuration below. And if we click forward from this slide to the next slide, that'll show sort of it more in detail some of those interventions to modify a toddler classroom. So we're introducing the idea of separation. So where you would have had, you know, a higher number of children in a single group, now we're bringing that social pod down. We're able to reuse again the same tables for art and dining, but we're also able to now reuse the same chairs, but create a physical separation from those chairs, whether elbow to elbow or whatever your rules are that you're putting into place. But these are now 2 classrooms where there once were 1. So you have to duplicate magic play stations. You have to duplicate food. You have to duplicate art. Everything that existed only once now needs to be duplicated. So we're showing the use of flexible partitions, again, a low capital expense. The use of a portable sink, there's a couple of these. Unfortunately, none of them have, there's no portable sink now that's child height. So obviously hand washing at this age group would definitely need to be teacher assisted. But one key thing to just point out here is really maintaining access to that toileting area. So as one teacher or caregiver is over to that toileting area, you can still create that group separation, that social pod, and keep those kind of intact. Kathy, if we click forward to pre-kinder, I think that's the lab, the classroom strategy group. So, you know, these are bigger bodies. These are much more mobile children. Fortunately, also we can take direction and we can experiences. You can see at the top current configuration, which is what we're used to having pre-pandemic. Those dining tables and art tables are all crammed together. Those chairs totally on top of each other. Our dramatic play and our interactive areas are separate. There's big space to move around. In that exact same space below, in the modified configuration, where you might have had 22 children in this classroom, you can still have 22 children. Now we're just basically breaking those into 2 groups. And again, I'm talking Texas ratios here. So what would apply where you are would apply. So again, deploying the use of these temporary dividers, we know that needs to be higher than head height. So 4 feet is probably fine here to kind of mitigate that droplet transmission from side to side. But you can see we've got the same number of tables in here. we're able to now separate those seating for mealtime. We create dramatic play areas. We've got to duplicate them. Whatever we do inside the classroom, we do on the other. Think about the arrangement. How do children from the portion of the classroom that's farther away from the toileting area, how do they get over to the toileting? Is that just at this age? Possibly, maybe not. How do we duplicate lockers? Do we bring in typical, temporary cubbies for children? How do we provide storage for nap mats? We obviously would probably want to have now 2 storage areas for nap mats as we go to sort of duplicate these classroom strategies. I believe those are the key kind of highlights of our interior or internal school modifications. One other thing to think about, just I know some of you are dealing with classrooms that are just not being used right now. So converting those classrooms temporarily into a staff area where they might be able to just decompress or sanitize or come in and kind of gear up for their day. And then also using those unused spaces for storage temporarily, or creating a new gross motor space inside of the classroom to sort of like cycle children in and out of, so you're able to thoroughly clean their classrooms when they're not in there. So let me kick it over to Pete now to talk about sort of what we're doing on the outside of the school.
Thanks, Daniel. I think as we started looking at this, one big thing we came up with initially as a team here was that the outdoor areas really are, it's great for the children to get outside, generally speaking, but now it's it's serving as a support for what we're having to do on the inside of the building from a disinfection standpoint, and kind of providing some boundaries for those social pods, as we were kind of talking about. So the big concept is, again, we're trying to create more distancing for safety. We're trying to extend the outside time, and then obviously provide a higher level of hygiene than we typically have done in the past. So as we started discussing throughout the day, and I'm sure this is happening in all of your schools, you have a higher level of disinfection you're trying to do, and cleaning within the daytime non-nap hours. So how do we get the children outside? Maybe it's more time, more visits to the outside. Maybe it's less total time, and depending on the climate where you're at, we're working a lot in the South. Obviously it's hotter and more humid where we are during the daytime. So how do we accommodate for the climate outside is another big piece there. So I've got some images and some points on here. I'm not going to go verbatim, but and then the next slide I'm going to have some kind of a before and after example of what we can do. So again, safety and distancing outside. Big thing is we're going to try to partition out the outside, just similar to what we're doing on the inside of the building. So there's some temporary fencing that we can get. There's a lot of different options for that. Temporary fencing and gating, kind of to move the kids in their pods through different spaces, so that we can get the areas inside disinfected, and also the outside as well, between social pods, trying to get a few minutes there where we're cleaning the equipment as necessary. Again, extending outside time, so we're looking at that support. We need that time. So again, in warm climates, we'd be looking at trying to add some shade, and in some cases rain protection with the use of shade sails, perhaps oversized umbrellas on huge weighted stands, that sort of thing, or even some places where we can move those umbrellas around with sleeves in the ground, just depending on the daytime. How are people disinfecting outdoors? I see that as a question. That's a good point. I'm going to get to that here in a second. So we're trying to extend the time, and another way to do that for your smaller kids, your infants and some of your toddlers, is actually you may be able to, if you have them, put those kids in that pod in a buggy for a little bit, and you can wheel them around. Maybe there's a way to, again, site specific, actually make this happen, but wheel them around so that it gives it time for the previous group to clear out, so you can clean the area that they're going to be going into. is another option there. So hygiene, noting from S. Gordon online here, there's a lot of different disinfectants out there. Some groups are actually using a diluted bleach on their steel and their plastic materials. There's actually been quite a bit of research done pre-COVID and now again talking about materials outside. And what seems to pop up the most is that your plastics are one of the material that you need to clean the most. That seems to be what the virus would live on longest. And that's any virus or any bacteria. It seems that through multiple studies, that's your longest living kind of material, followed by steel. Those you're looking at potentially up to, in a lab setting, 2, 3, even up to 4 days. Now with the outside, you get some UV working for you as well, so that's helpful. Wood and natural materials like rope are actually a great material. They're generally a drier material that can absorb moisture, which actually helps kill microbes. So those are great materials, especially if you can say you have a structure that's at the end of its life cycle. Maybe a good time to just take that out and replace it with something. There's a lot of commercial grade wood products out there that really have the same kind of warranties as your steel and plastic. You know, that's a big capital expenditure, obviously, but if you're looking at doing something soon anyway, that might be a good time to go ahead and do that. The other thing that you could consider is some kind of dirty toy storage versus clean. So you'd have to have a staff person that could, you know, between social pods, kind of put that into the dirty bin, take it to a separated area, clean it, and be able to bring it back for the next round of play. So you kind of have to have 2 sets there to cycle through. Actually, let's go on to the next slide too. Kathy, thank you. And this will get into a little bit more information, some more pictures here as well. But there could be some possibility of some overnight storage areas where, you know, things are treated with a UV light, kind of like a greenhouse, so to speak. That's something that's being explored definitely for those sorts of cleanings. Okay, so I'm going to jump into this example. The top is a school in the Austin area, actually. So we used a real site plan. And just to show the different areas in the top of the plan north, if you will, there's an infant area existing currently. And then to the left, there's a toddler play zone. And then basically the entire bottom and the right side of the plan is all pre-K with the older kids. And then there's a community space. There is a community space for all the age groups at this point to be able to use. So again, we're trying to break this area up as a big thing. So temporary fencing. We definitely need more shade, 100%. I mean, we're in a very warm environment. So looking at how we do that, both in a permanent solution and a temporary solution. So that bottom image shows a few extra trees. We've got some shade sail fabrics that we could install in a permanent solution. And then we've got some temporary umbrella locations that can be moved around depending on the time of the day. And if the kids are out there, it could even be shifted. You could move an umbrella from a pre-K or toddler area to an infant area, or vice versa, depending on nap schedules and things like that. So we're really looking at how do we pod that up. And again, this is very site specific. So, you know, there's always an interesting site plan that goes along with a child care center. Some have a lot more room. Some are a bit tighter. So you have to get a bit creative with that as well. So see if there's any other questions on there. Yeah, there's a lot of people commenting on solutions for disinfection. So everybody needs to check out the chat on there too. A lot of good input there. So that's all I have really. I'm sure we'll tackle some more in Q&A, and I'm going to flip it to Kevin for the HVAC.
Thank you. Transitioning from the outside back to the inside, I guess, and you know, when we spend a lot of time in an indoor environment, and even pre-pandemic, it was important to have a good, healthy building because it's building's basically a living, breathing thing, if you will. And it's important to have good filtered air and good ventilation and good air changeover. However, it's probably not something that people think about a lot because most of the systems are hidden back behind the ceiling or in the walls, or it's not something you see and you're only thinking about it when the temperature is not right. You can have a good facility can maintain temperature, but not necessarily have good ventilation. So in putting this together, we kind of looked at tying this all together. And so I wanted to look at 3 different things related to the HVAC systems. And that is separation, ventilation, and filtration or disinfection of the system as a whole. So looking at things that we'd look at in evaluating a facility with regard to the HVAC system is how does the HVAC system interact with the different spaces? Is it separate? Are your classrooms separated from each other, or are they tied together? Now, on existing facilities, it may be impossible to separate them. On newer facilities, you might want to look at doing that, such that you're isolating a classroom from other classrooms, or you're making sure that the HVAC system for the classroom is not tied with the office areas. That's all related to, what's coming out in the news, and we're hearing a lot more of right now, is can the virus be transmitted through a ventilation system? Generally speaking, transmitting it from one area of a building to another, I haven't seen a good study yet that really defines that can happen. Not saying it can't, but haven't seen any real good studies on that yet. Now, within a given area, yes, they've started talking more about the ventilation and the air circulation within a space, and that's something that needs to be looked at. Systems need to circulate the air within the space in a good uniform pattern, as well as be able to ventilate and do an air changeover rate within a space. Air changeover, what I'm referring to is basically recirculation of the air a certain amount of time, so it changes over a number of times within the space. In addition to that, you want to look at the amount of outside air that's being brought in, and the ventilation of a space is really comprised of the recirculation of air, the outside air or fresh air that's brought in, and then the amount of exhaust that you're pulling out of the building, because in order to maintain proper pressurization and ventilation in a building, you've got to both bring in fresh air and take out exhaust air. So looking at the systems and how they are separated or combined is something that we feel would be important to look at. Same thing with similar thing with a lot of discussion has been talked about bringing in outside air, increasing the amount of outside air, which basically means increasing the changeover of the air that's in the space rather than having it recirculated constantly. You bring in outside air so that you dilute the air within the space. That leads into, you may or may not be able to increase the amount of ventilation or amount of outside air being brought into an HVAC system because it has penalties to it, if you will, meaning capacity issues of whether you can actually handle it based on the area of the country that you're in. It may be too hot and humid to be able to increase the amount of outside air. But it's something that should be looked at. And tied to that is your exhaust rates. How is the building exhaust being handled? Are the restrooms all on light switch fans and they only come on and you're only exhausting when a light switch is flipped on in those restrooms? Or is it a constant system that you're constantly exhausting? And that constant exhaust helps to facilitate the changeover of air within the space. So those are things that we feel need to be looked at, and it's stuff you're starting to hear a little bit more of in the news. As far as air changeover rates and guidance for what we do as engineers for designing, I rely heavily on ASHRAE, which is ASHRAE is the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. And if you're interested, you can go to their website. They've put together a page. I think there's a link that says COVID on it, and they've put together quite a few of the recommendations that you're hearing, both from the CDC and the EPA, and that are all referenced in there, and they're doing research on different filtration, disinfectant systems, etc. So it's a great reference. The other things that we're talking about with regard to ventilation in a facility is we want the air changeover. You want to be able to circulate air on a regular basis. So some of the recommendations that we're making, and they're being made nationally, are increase the runtime on your systems. Turn your system on several hours before the facility opens, and run it several hours after the facility is open. Because the more you circulate air through, or more you run the system, the more the air is circulated, which leads to my third item, which was filtration and disinfection. Filtration, the more the system runs, the more opportunity it has to go through the filters on the system. Which filters are another item that are important to look at, and there's been a lot of talk about it here lately. The recommendation for systems is to use a MERV 13 filter. MERV is a rating system for filters. It basically determines how much capture they have. MERV 13 captures in the neighborhood of, depending on the filter manufacturer, in the neighborhood of 90%, down to about 3 microns, which is down around the pathogen, viral, bacterial level. So trying to get your systems with a MERV 13 filter is probably doable with a lot of systems, not all systems, because the higher the MERV rating on the filter, the higher static pressure is imposed on the system, which could cause a reduction in airflow and performance. But filtration needs to be looked at. And the typical HVAC system that we've been doing and designing for here for years have like MERV 8 filters. And MERV 8 are somewhere around the neighborhood of 50% capture rate of the same level of particle as MERV 13. The other, yeah, Daniel?
I was just going to ask really quickly, what would your recommendations being if I have a school that has operable windows? Is it a good idea to use that? Is it conditional on where I am in the country or the world, or what the weather conditions are outside?
Yeah, I would say this is how I address that. Obviously we live in the coastal climate, and it's hot and humid down here in the Houston area, and there's not a lot of opportunity for opening windows. So if you're in a climate that's possible, yes, by all means. However, we typically like to look at bringing in outside air in a controlled fashion in some way. Opening a window, whether it be hot and humid or hot and dry, helps to affect your indoor controlled environment. So I'm not a big proponent of saying just open the window, because you don't have any control over of the amount of air, the amount of humidity, amount of moisture, or lack of moisture in some respects, of what you're doing to your internal environment. It's obviously there are opportunities for it, but generally speaking, when we look at the systems and stuff, I wanted to try to do it in a controlled fashion, if at all possible. Okay. And I was going to touch on real quick too, I know, because this has been a topic, UV lighting. UV lighting kills bacteria and viruses. It's a proven fact. UV lighting has been used in HVAC systems for a long time. We've been specifying and putting it in systems for a number of years now. The thing I wanted to point out and make sure everybody understood is that the UV lighting added to an HVAC unit is more for the cleanliness and maintenance of the unit. UV lighting relies upon the intensity of the lighting and the duration at which it is imparted on a surface. So simply putting UV lighting in a unit to disinfect the airflow, it can be done, but for practical purposes, it's not happening that way. What the UV lighting in the system is for is more to keep the unit clean, the surfaces of the coil in that clean. But there are opportunities and there are products out there. There's a number of different filtration type products that can be added to units or added to rooms. And I know we're starting and discussing, standalone HEPA filter units and standalone UV lighting units and stuff. And that's probably where the trend that we're going to. And it's probably in a lot of instances a better option for an individual unit to be installed in a given space versus trying to retrofit some of the existing HVAC units, just because cost, space, and performance of the unit isn't going to be able to handle it. But there are options out there. Every system, there's not a magic bullet, if you will, of doing it, but there are means and methods of increasing filtration, increasing outside air dilution, ventilation, and even looking at disinfectant using UV lighting or bipolar ionization in the system, as well as active filters and several other things. And it's all, it's got to be the existing system has to be evaluated as to what would be best, not to hamper its performance.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin, for that. So we could also take some, I know we got to get to Q&A here quickly. We could take some questions offline, or if people have specific questions about their system. I know it's a pretty complicated concept, so we might have to take some of those offline. So as I said earlier on, the goal of this was to really give you a toolkit of things that you can use. So we've sort of broken those into two. There's been a lot of requests for this document. So go to our website. It's danielscottturner.com, and we'll put in your information at the bottom, and we'll shoot this out to everyone so you'll have a copy of it. But just broke this into two categories: the immediate interventions, which are things you can do right now. These would be kind of the low cost, like low capital. And a lot of this is just, Dr. Fauci was on the NewsHour on Friday, and one of the things he said was, to get children back into school, we're just going to have to think creatively. So some of this, you're going to have to read on this and read what your parents' temperature is on these things, no pun intended. But some of the things are pretty straightforward, and it's like using those unused spaces for different purposes in the interim. Increasing your sanitation scheduling, re-looking at how people circulate through the building, how classes circulate through the building. Do hallways become one way now, so we're not sort of crossing in the hall? Having extra storage for PPE, having extra changes of clothes for children that are kind of quickly to get in and out, and then really looking at how are we caring for the health and safety of our staff. So these are some of the immediate interventions that address those items. The next, long-term solutions, Kevin alluded to this. Some of these, like improvements to your mechanical systems, just in general, make your buildings post-COVID. So they're smart. One thing that Pete mentioned was the construction of a viable outdoor classroom, like a real structure that is an outdoor classroom that you could use year round. That's something that would be a long-term. It's more of a capital expense, but it gives you that freedom to pull children out of the school to clean those classrooms. Kathy, if you don't mind clicking forward to that long-term solution, I think there were a couple of other high points on there, and then we can get into Q&A. Yeah, so really the mechanical system upgrades, those are expensive. So those need to be really weighed against the benefit, and they would need to be looked at on a sort of a case-by-case basis. But look at permanent solutions like setting up a permanent isolation room. I know a lot of us have a little sick child bed next to the front desk when someone gets a temperature. That whole process might be more formalized. It might have to be an enclosed room that Kevin was talking about with its own ventilation system. These things are all possible. Some of them are quick, some of them aren't, some of them are expensive, some of them aren't. So that was our point of putting this whole thing together for you, so that you could read through it, what's best for me, what's best for my programs. Reach out to us if we can help. We're happy to do that.
Wow, that was fantastic information, guys. So here is my favorite phrase of the day: low capital expense. And do you know how happy I am to hear you guys use words like that? Because usually when we meet architects and engineers, we start to think about big checks. So thank you for that, because I think this information was very practical. And a couple of kind of commonalities I see in the comments and questions. Do you guys have a good, well, so first of all, around partitions, I know that early on as schools closed and were allowed certain group sizes, states vary wildly in what's an acceptable partition. So everyone should certainly check with their own state or local health department before they know what suffices to separate a group. But do you guys have a resource or some resources, and maybe it's here because you have resources for partitions that might be options for different people?
I saw that question come through, and I do have a list of partitions that we put together. Some of them are cloth. So for fomite transmission, sort of surface transmission, they're not the best. But yeah, I have a list, so I can shoot that. I can broadcast that out to the group.
That would be great. Yeah, I'd love to. A couple of our guests here have made a few comments on some that they like. And I think that if you guys have a couple, we would love to add that to our resources page. So that would be great. It does look like everyone, and I hear this across the country, I think we are continuing to check parents in and outside. And I love your idea that we would start to use that space as a reflection of what our inside space looks like. So help customize that space to make it your own and make it part of your school so that the parents feel more included, and maybe it's an easier transition for the children. Also to get the children involved in helping to create that space in a fun way would be nice. We had another interesting question, and I'd like, I'm going to continue to talk to our clients about decisions they may make this fall around opportunities relating to what the public schools are doing. In other words, will they choose to serve 5-year kindergarten students who haven't yet gone to the public schools, and parents may view a more stable situation as more consistent? And then also they may be serving their after-school populations on a more regular basis. They may be in school one day and then out the next, and in school again and out the next. They may also have the need for part-time students where they didn't before. So do you guys have any different considerations that people might think about if they plan to get creative with that particular age group? So it might be 5-year kindergarten to 5th grade. Will that look more like the pre-K concept that you talked about, or would you think about that differently at all?
I might think about it a little bit differently, and guys, feel free to chime in. Obviously, as the children, as you know, a kindergartner or a 1st grader, they're definitely more apt to be using masks. I think that we would start looking at that. We would start looking at a little bit more of the social distancing within the space. If they're doing online classes through their ISD or whatever, we need to look at how that's deployed in the school, whether it's on a laptop with some plexiglass dividers or something. There was one study that, and it's in the Journal of Science, that said children, the age group that we're talking about is one third to a half less likely to transmit the disease than adults. So we do know that there's less of a risk, but as children are aging up, they become more cooperative in the participation in keeping the virus sort of like tamped down.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would add, talking about exterior, play for that older group, it's going to be it would be a little bit different in that, especially up to that 4th and 5th grade. Those kids typically want a little bit more room as well, and they're going to be doing some different activities. There's going to be a large contingent that want to do some more athletic type play, which is going to, it's again, you create the right pods, but you do need more room, so you may have to look to potentially neighboring property. Maybe there's an available open space that you could hopefully lease and fence in and get licensed and then go that direction. But if it's a tight site and you're kind of maxed out with your smaller kid, partitions and that may be a little difficult, but could be done, I think.
Right. And, just to expand a little bit more, as some of our clients begin to support distance learning in their schools, in their childcare centers, it would probably create the need for each child to have their own device, their own space to connect in with their classroom with headphones. And, so the space configuration and way that they operate a program like that might look completely different. Any other thoughts on that? So you have a child who might be occasionally in their public school, they might need to be in your child care center. Will they need an individual space for connectivity, for distance learning? Will they then come away from that with an activity they need to do? There's so many questions about how this might look. And of course, a lot of our clients are thinking very creatively about how do we solve problems for families, help them do the work they need, create a positive learning environment for children, whether they're in school all the time and we have them after school or they're in our building part of the day. So some of those space considerations will get very important over the next couple of weeks.
And Kathy, if you don't mind, I'd like to add to that. I mean, your building is your asset through this entire thing. So if there's portions of it that you're not using as thoroughly, be creative. Think about how can I, whether maybe I'm serving this older group of children. One thing that we're doing for one of our clients here in Texas is we're actually converting some classroom space to a parent co-working suite that's just for their parents. There were some definite caveats. It has to be completely separate from the school, has to have a separate entrance. As Kevin was talking about, it's got a separate HVAC system. But we're using that asset, which is your building, to kind of now not only support the children, but to support the whole family. So support a parent that might be, recently laid off and looking for another job, or just needs to get out of the house and have a quiet space to work safely.
That's fantastic. I love the creativity that this industry has. A couple of other new great questions. Can you speak any about health and safety on vehicles, buses, vans, as we start to transport children back and forth to school? Have you given that any thought? You guys are building guys. Daniel was like,
I know one of the statistics. I know the airlines are all trying to get us back on their planes, so they've been pretty thorough with their descriptions on how they're either spraying down those spaces. They've upped their filtration and upped their air change rates on planes to now once every 2 minutes, which is kind of remarkable. But I would say if there's not some local guidelines on that through the state, I would probably defer to just some local sanitation guidelines on that.
That's, okay, thanks. We'll try to find you guys some resources on that, because that's a fantastic question. I don't know about everybody else, but I feel like someone asks a question or points something out every day and I go, whoa, wouldn't have seen that one coming. We have to think about that completely differently. And here's another interesting one, and this one always confuses me. Talk to us about shoes. So there are a lot of you know, already we had clients that didn't allow shoes into the infant room without booties. And obviously infants are on the floor. You need to be especially careful about that. But there are a lot of people who have the children bring school shoes, which are indoor shoes, and then different shoes for outdoor shoes. Talk a little bit about that, if that has relevance to how you look at your building.
I would say that, you know, again, that goes back to the fomite, the surface transmission, keeping those sort of contaminated school shoes from getting into the building. We would need to accommodate storage for that extra set of shoes. So whether that's in the child's cubby or, you know, there might be some storage on the outside of the building for those.
Right. We also, of course, have clients who ask about home shoes and school shoes. So this one takes it even farther. And is there a separate inside school shoe and outside school shoes? So lots of different considerations here. You guys did a beautiful job during our presentation of answering questions on the fly. And we're there, so I'll reiterate that Daniel has directed everyone to his website for this information, but also we will email you guys a link to this presentation, which will then be on our website, and this PDF presentation. So you have this information at your fingertips. Is there, could you give us your contact information again, Daniel? And I'm sure you can direct people to any one of Kevin, Pete, and Jose if they need.
Yeah, absolutely. So this PDF document, and we'll get it out to everyone. You can request it on our website, which is, I'll say it slower this time, danielscottturner.com, and it's 3 T's in a row, so it's a little tricky. The good thing about the PDF, it's a smart PDF, so Pete's and Kevin's contact are in there. They're hyperlinked, so you can click on them and it'll take you straight to their contact information. Yeah, because a lot of these solutions I know that we presented today might not look exactly like your condition or your question. So please reach out to us, and you know, we're happy to sort of analyze your specific challenges and help you kind of come up with the best solution. One thing that I sort of breezed over very quickly were the 3 questions in the new normal. So I mean, we really want to help you ensure that your school is you're taking the most responsible and appropriate steps, kind of given the information that we have now. So we're going to keep updating that information and keep being present and ready for you to help with that.
Fantastic. Well, again, I love that you guys were so proactive in putting this information together and so thoughtful about making it easy and cost effective for people who have enough else to deal with in their world right now. So thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you, Kevin, Pete, and Jose for joining us and helping our clients navigate. If you guys have follow-up questions, please reach out to Daniel. If you can't find him, ask me, because I keep up with him a little bit when I can. So thanks again, and we hope to have you guys back as things change in the industry and new protocols happen, and you just wake up in the middle of the night with another wonderful idea for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks
for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Take care,
Thank you.
friends. Be safe.
See you. You too.